I paid for a house that wasn't mine, kept a secret that wasn't mine to keep, and sat quietly at a Thanksgiving table while my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and called me the person everyone hates. And I want you to know, that was actually the easy part of my evening. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I have attended 41 Thanksgiving dinners in my life. I have survived burnt turkeys, passive-aggressive aunts, one fistfight over a football game in 1987, and a year where my brother Dale showed up with a girlfriend who turned out to already be someone else's wife. I have endured bad wine, worse opinions, and the particular kind of silence that falls over a table when someone says something they can't take back. I thought I had seen everything. I had not seen everything. Now, before I tell you what happened at that table, I need you to understand something about my daughter-in-law, Brittany. Because Brittany is not a villain. She is something far more complicated than that. And by the end of this story, you're going to feel something about her that you absolutely do not expect to feel right now. But we'll get there. Brittany had made a sweet potato casserole with marshmallows on top. Now, I want to be fair. I want to be the bigger person. But those marshmallows were burnt. The sweet potatoes were somehow both undercooked and mushy at the same time, and she had placed it at the center of the table like it was the crown jewel of human culinary achievement. "Britt, this looks amazing," my son Ryan said to her, beaming like a man who had never once told the truth about food. Ryan has been lying to that woman since the day he met her. That's not my business. That's between him and God. I said nothing about the casserole. I took a small portion, moved it around my plate, and smiled the way you smile when you're 70. 1 year old and you've learned that some battles are not worth the ammunition. My other son Derek was there with his wife Carol, a sensible woman from Ohio who brings store-bought rolls without apology, and whom I have always liked enormously. Their kids, my grandchildren Mason and Lily, were at the small table in the corner, completely unbothered by the adult world and its many complications. Lucky them. My sister Patricia was there too. Patricia is 74, sharp as a tack, and has never once in her life held a thought inside her head for longer than 4 seconds before releasing it into the world. She was already on her second glass of Chardonnay by the time we sat down. And then there was Brittany. Brittany, who had been married to my son for 6 years. Brittany, who had opinions about everything and knowledge of almost nothing. Brittany, who once told me at a Christmas party that she didn't trust people who liked jazz. Jazz. The woman doesn't trust people who like jazz. I like jazz. We talked about the usual things. Football, the weather, whether Carol's brother should have bought that boat. Patricia told a story about her neighbor's dog that had absolutely no point and took 11 minutes. Derek laughed too loud at everything the way he does when he's nervous, which told me things between him and Carol weren't perfect. But that was not my business. Ryan barely looked up from his plate. That should have been my first warning. But here's the thing about warnings. They only make sense in hindsight. In the moment, they just look like a quiet man eating turkey. Ryan is my oldest, 43 years old, broad-shouldered, looks like me when I was younger and took better care of myself. He has my eyes and unfortunately also my stubbornness, which means we have spent the better part of a decade finding elaborate ways to have the same argument. He loves me. I know he does. But loving someone and being comfortable around them are two very different things. And Ryan and I had long since settled into a relationship that worked best at a distance of about 40 miles. He lived 42 miles away. We had calibrated this carefully and without ever discussing it. Brittany, on the other hand, was talkative, almost aggressively so. She kept steering the conversation back to their neighborhood, their friends, some renovation they were doing on the kitchen. Always their life. Always performed like we were an audience she was trying to impress or convince of something. I would later understand exactly why she was performing, but that comes in part 2. I drank my wine, I ate my turkey, I let Patricia talk for 11 minutes about the dog. And then it happened. Somewhere between the second round of sides and Patricia launching into a third story that also appeared to have no destination, Brittany looked directly at me from across the table. She had a particular look. I knew this look. It was the look she got when she had been wanting to say something for a while and the wine had finally given her the nerve. I should have excused myself to the bathroom. I did not excuse myself to the bathroom. "You know, Lucas," Brittany said loudly enough for the whole table to hear, setting her fork down with a small, deliberate click, "I've been thinking." God help us all, I thought. I smiled across at her. Is that right? I think that you... She paused, glanced around at everyone like she was about to deliver a punchline, are genuinely the person that everyone in this family complains about the most. She laughed, waited for someone to join her, and when nobody did, she pushed forward anyway. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "How does that even feel? To be the person everyone kind of hates?" The table went silent. And I mean silent. The kind of silent where you can hear the candles burning. Where Mason and Lily somehow sensed something from the kids' table and stopped talking too. Where Patricia's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there, suspended in the air like even it didn't know what to do next. Derek made a sound like he'd swallowed wrong. Carol stared at her plate with the focused intensity of a woman who was mentally already in Ohio. And Ryan, my son Ryan, said nothing. He looked at his food. He picked up his fork. He put it back down. He did not look at me. And that, more than anything Brittany said, is the thing I will carry about that moment for the rest of my life. Not her words. His silence. Because there is a specific kind of hurt that only your child can deliver. And it is always administered not through what they do, but through what they choose not to do. Ryan chose not to do anything. Now, I want you to hold that image, because everything that happens in this story, every phone call, every confession, every moment where this family gets cracked open and examined, it all comes back to that. A father, a son, and 4 seconds of silence that said more than either of us had said to each other in years. I sat with it for exactly those 4 seconds. Then I reached out very calmly and set my wine glass down on the table. I didn't slam it. I didn't make a show of it. I set it down the way you set something down when you want your hands to be completely free and your mind to be completely clear. I looked at Brittany. She was still smiling, but it had gotten smaller, uncertain, like she'd expected a reaction and wasn't quite sure what to do with the one she was getting. "Brittany," I said to her evenly, almost gently, "let me ask you something." "Okay," she said back to me, cautious now. "How would you feel," I said slowly, holding her gaze across that table, "if you found out today, not tomorrow, not next week, today, that you were homeless?" "Nobody breathed what?" Brittany said to me, blinking. "If you went home tonight," I continued calmly, "and discovered that the house you live in, the roof over your head, the address on your driver's license, all of it, was just gone. How would that feel?" "Lucas, what are you even talking about?" "I'm asking you a question," I said simply, without blinking. "You asked me one. I'm asking you one." The laugh died. She looked across at Ryan. "And this is the moment I need you to pay attention to." Because Ryan didn't look confused. Ryan looked the way a man looks when a door he has been holding shut with everything he is finally starts to open on its own. He looked terrified. "Dad," Ryan said to me. His voice was low. A warning, or maybe a plea. Probably both. "I'm just making conversation," I said pleasantly, and picked my wine glass back up. Patricia put her Chardonnay down for the first time all evening. That alone should tell you everything about the gravity of that moment. Derek cleared his throat loudly. "So, anyone want more rolls?" Carol made rolls. "They're from Walmart," Carol said automatically, and then seemed to realize that was perhaps not the priority right now. Brittany was still looking at me. The smile was completely gone. In its place was something I genuinely had not expected to see on her face. Fear. Not the embarrassed kind. Not the "I've been caught being rude" kind. The real kind. And that told me something important. Something I filed away carefully and quietly. The way I file away most useful information. She already knew something was wrong. She didn't know what. She didn't know how much. But somewhere underneath all that performance, and that casserole with the burnt marshmallows, Brittany already knew that the foundation of her life was not as solid as she had been led to believe. I had just confirmed it. Ryan picked up his fork again. His hand wasn't quite steady. I finished my wine. Outside, the November wind pressed against the windows, and the candles on the table flickered once, altogether, like they were trying to tell us something. Now, I should tell you what I knew. I should tell you what I had been carrying alone for 8 months. What started on a cold March afternoon when Ryan sat across from me in my kitchen, red-eyed and ashamed, and told me everything. But here's the thing about secrets. They have a weight to them, and before you can understand how heavy this one was, you need to understand what it cost me to carry it. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Here's something nobody tells you about keeping a secret for 8 months. It doesn't get lighter, it gets heavier. Every single day, it adds another pound. And by the morning after that Thanksgiving dinner, I was carrying so much weight I'm surprised the chair held me. I have always been an early riser. 6 a.m., no alarm, every single day of my life. My late wife Margaret used to say I woke up early because I was afraid the world would start without me. She wasn't entirely wrong. I like to be ahead of things. I like to see them coming, which is precisely why what Ryan had done, to himself, to his family, to me, had kept me staring at my ceiling every night for 8 months straight. You can't see something coming when the person hiding it is your own son. The morning after Thanksgiving, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee at 6:14 when my phone rang. "Derek, you want to tell me what that was about last night?" Derek said to me, skipping hello entirely. Derek has never been one for preamble. "Good morning to you too, son," I said back to him. "Dad." I took a slow sip of coffee. "It was dinner conversation, Derek. People talk at dinner. People talk at dinner," he repeated back to me slowly, like he was translating it from another language. "Dad, you basically told your daughter-in-law she was about to be living on the street, at Thanksgiving, in front of the kids." "Mason and Lily were at the other table," I said to him. "That is not the point. I asked her a hypothetical question," I said calmly. "She asked me one first. I was simply returning the volley." There was a long pause on Derek's end. I could hear Carol's voice in the background, low and indistinct, and then Derek said something to her with his hand over the phone. When he came back, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. "Dad," Derek said to me carefully, "is something going on with Ryan?" I set my coffee cup down. This was the moment. 8 months I had been carrying this. 8 months of watching my oldest son pretend everything was fine. Watching Brittany redecorate a house she didn't know was borrowed. Watching a clock that only I could see tick down towards something ugly and unavoidable. "You should ask Ryan that," I said to Derek. "I'm asking you," he said back to me. "Derek." I kept my voice steady and even. "There are things that aren't mine to tell. What I will tell you is this. Pay attention over the next few days. That's all I'm going to say." He didn't like that. Derek never likes not having the full picture. But he knows me well enough to understand when I've said everything I'm going to say. We hung up at 6:31. By 6:53, Ryan was calling. And here is where it gets interesting. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Not to be dramatic. I just needed a moment to decide what kind of father I was going to be in that conversation. The soft one, or the honest one. I picked up. "Dad." Ryan's voice came through rough and ragged. He hadn't slept. Good. Neither had I. And misery appreciates company. "Ryan," I said back to him. "What were you doing last night?" he asked me directly. "I was having Thanksgiving dinner with my family," I said. "The turkey was excellent. The sweet potato casserole was not, but we don't need to get into that." "This isn't funny," Ryan said to me sharply. "No," I agreed quietly. "It really isn't." A long silence stretched between us. I heard him exhale. That long, slow breath he's done since he was a teenager whenever he was trying to hold himself together. I used to hear that sound through his bedroom door after his mother died. "It is not a sound a father forgets." "She's asking questions," Ryan finally said to me. "I imagine she is," I said back. "Dad, I need you to just..." "No." I said it quietly, but I said it once. The way I say things I mean completely. "Ryan, I have done everything you asked me to do for 8 months. I have kept my mouth shut. I have watched you patch holes in a sinking boat and tell your wife the water on the floor is from a spilled glass. I am done with that." Silence. "The mortgage payment bounced in March," I said to him. "I covered it. I covered April, too. And May. And every single month since then. Because you asked me to. And I love you. And I was a fool who thought you were about to fix it yourself." I paused and let that land. "How much does she know?" "Nothing." "Ryan, how much does Brittany know?" "She knows we've been," he said to me quietly, searching for the word, tight. Financially. Tight. I almost laughed. Almost. "Son, you are not tight. You are underwater. There is a difference between a belt and a tourniquet. A significant one." "I have a plan," he started to say. "You've had a plan since March," I said back to him. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. "And I want you to notice something. Because this moment right here, This quiet between a father and a son on a Friday morning after Thanksgiving is the real center of this entire story. Not the dinner, not Brittany's words, not my response. This, a man who had been drowning for 8 months, and a father who had been holding his head above water in secret, and the moment when the father finally gently let go. Ryan, I said, softer now, I'm not doing this to punish you. I want you to understand that clearly, but I cannot keep paying for a life you haven't been honest about. Not with your wife, not with your brother, and not with yourself. I took a breath. It stops this month. I heard something on his end that I think he didn't mean for me to hear. It might have been crying. My son is 43 years old and stubborn as concrete, and I cannot tell you what it does to a father to hear that sound come through a phone on a gray Friday morning. Okay, Ryan said finally, barely a word, more like air escaping from somewhere deep. Okay, I said back to him. We stayed on the line together for another minute without saying anything at all. Sometimes that's all there is. Sometimes two people just need to breathe in the same silence for a moment before the world starts moving again. He told her on a Sunday. Derek called me that evening to tell me that Ryan had called him first, looking for a lifeline, a loan, anything. And Derek, God bless him, had said no. Gently, but firmly. No. I don't know whether I had told him to do that or whether he simply knew. Either way, I was proud of him. Carol apparently handed Derek a glass of bourbon the moment he got off that call and said to him simply, "Family is a lot." I would like that on my headstone. Ryan sat Brittany down that Sunday afternoon and told her everything. The missed payments. The failed investment. My name on every wire transfer that had been keeping their address theirs for the better part of a year. I know this because Brittany called me herself at 9 p.m. She didn't yell. I had prepared myself for yelling. Instead, her voice was flat and very small, completely stripped of all the performance I had watched for 6 years. How long? Brittany asked me quietly. 8 months, I said back to her. A pause. Why didn't you tell me? Because he's my son, I said to her honestly, and I thought he'd fix it. I was wrong about that, and I'm sorry. She didn't respond to that right away. I heard her breathing, thinking, processing the kind of information that rearranges everything you thought you knew about your own life. Are we going to lose the house? She asked me, just like that. Direct, clear, no decoration whatsoever. It was the most I had ever liked her. Not if we handle this correctly, I said to her, and quickly. Okay, Brittany said to me. Same word Ryan had used. Same exhausted, stripped-down syllable. And right then, for the first time in 8 months, I felt the weight shift. Not disappear, not even close, but shift, which meant something bigger was about to begin. And trust me, you are not ready for how this ends. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. Asterix, I want you to think about the most uncomfortable dinner you have ever attended in your life. The most tension you have ever felt sitting at a table with people you love. Now multiply that by 8 months of silence, one bounced mortgage, and a daughter-in-law who just found out her entire life had a cosigner she never knew about. That is where we are. That is what we are walking into. Asterisk. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I drove the 42 miles to Ryan's house. I didn't call ahead. I have found in my 71 years that some conversations need to happen in person, unannounced, before anyone has time to rehearse. Ryan would have rehearsed. Brittany would have rehearsed. I needed them unrehearsed. I needed them real. I pulled into their driveway at 10:13 in the morning and sat in my truck for a moment. It was a nice house. Colonial style, red brick, black shutters. A tire swing in the front yard that Mason had outgrown 2 years ago, but nobody had taken down yet. Margaret would have loved this house. I thought about that for a second. Then I got out of the truck. Brittany opened the door before I knocked. She had clearly been awake for hours. No makeup, hair pulled back, wearing a sweatshirt that I recognized as one of Ryan's. She looked younger without all the performance. Smaller, more like a person and less like a presentation. Lucas, Brittany said to me. Not warm, not cold. Just honest. Brittany, I said back to her. Can I come in? She stepped aside without a word. Ryan was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked up when I walked in, and the expression on his face cycled through about 4 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, relief, guilt, and then something that settled into plain exhaustion. I didn't know you were coming, Ryan said to me. I know, I said back to him, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from him like we did this every day. That was the point. Not defensively. More like she needed something to hold her up. So, she said to both of us, looking between me and Ryan. What happens now? And I want you to notice, she didn't ask Ryan. She looked at both of us. Because in the span of one Sunday afternoon, the architecture of her marriage had been completely reconstructed, and she was still figuring out where everybody stood in the new version of it. I reached into my jacket pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the table. Ryan looked at it. What is that? He asked me. It's a number, I said to him. The exact total of what I've covered over 8 months. Mortgage payments, the insurance gap in June, the property tax in September that you didn't mention but I found out about anyway. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. I'm not collecting it, I said to him clearly. I want that understood before either of you say anything. I am not here for repayment. That money is gone and I made my peace with it. I paused, but I needed you both to see the number, because you cannot fix what you refuse to look at. Brittany unfolded the paper. I watched her face as she read it, watched the stillness that came over her, the particular stillness of someone doing math in their head and not liking any of the answers. Ryan, Brittany said to him quietly, setting the paper down. I know, Ryan said back to her. He wasn't looking at either of us. He was looking at the table like it owed him an explanation. Look at me, Brittany said to him. And he did. Slowly. The way you look at someone when you are genuinely ashamed and there is nowhere left to hide. Why didn't you tell me? She asked him. Not angry, something worse than angry. Genuinely wounded. Why did you let your father carry this instead of just telling me? Ryan was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something to her that I did not expect, something that I think surprised even him. Because you married someone successful, Ryan said to her, and I couldn't figure out how to tell you that he no longer existed. The kitchen went completely quiet. Now I have heard a lot of things in my life. I have sat with people in their worst moments. I held Margaret's hand through her last night. I have heard things that broke me and things that rebuilt me. But I want you to understand that sentence from my son in that quiet kitchen on a Monday morning cracked something open in that room that no argument ever could have. Brittany looked at Ryan for a long time. Then she walked over, pulled out the chair beside him, and sat down. Not across from him, beside him. And that small, quiet movement told me more about who she actually was than 6 years of Thanksgiving dinners ever had. You are still that person, Brittany said to him firmly. You are just also this one, and this one needed to ask for help. Ryan looked at her. Something in his face shifted, the way a sky shifts right after a storm passes, and you suddenly remember what light looks like. He reached over and took her hand. I looked away. Some moments don't belong to an audience. I drove home the same 42 miles I had driven that morning. The November sky had cleared and the light was thin and gold the way it only gets in late autumn, like the sun itself was running low and trying to make what was left count. I thought about Margaret the whole drive. I thought about all the things she would have said about this, all the ways she would have handled it better, warmer, faster. She always knew when to push and when to simply sit beside someone. I thought about how I had tried, in my clumsy way, to do both. I thought about that Thanksgiving table, Brittany's question, my glass hitting the table, Ryan's silence. And I thought about the fact that sometimes the most important thing a parent can do is not protect their child from the consequences of their choices, but stand close enough that when the consequences arrive, the child doesn't face them alone. I pulled into my driveway, went inside, put on some jazz. Margaret always said I woke up early because I was afraid the world would start without me. But sitting there that evening, in the quiet of my house, with the music filling up the corners of every room, I wasn't afraid of anything. For the first time in 8 months, I had put the weight down, and Lord, did it feel good to finally just sit. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.